So, hi guys, my name is Byron, and I want to start reviewing South Park, King of the Hill, and other shows like The Boondocks. And today I want to start with the episode Raising the Bar of South Park. And in this episode, they talk a lot about the obesity issue and also the culture of lacking shame. And this was an episode that happened, just about like 10 years ago. Like Michelle Obama is featured in this. And what happens in this episode is that the South Park kids go to Walmart and they see a lot of people on mobility scooters. And what happens is, Kyle fat shames Cartman, and Cartman feels ashamed and of his weight issue, and he decides to get a mobility scooter. So, in the first part, we're kind of seeing like an issue that's very common in our society, which is a couple of things. First of all, there is a huge issue of fat shaming because I grew up in the '90s, so definitely calling somebody a fat ass or a fat fuck was very very common, and definitely it's just like considered a form of ball busting. And then we also see films like Full Metal Jacket where people usually target people who are fat and insult them a lot because sometimes people do that to be like, hey, you know what, it's your fault that you're fat, you're lazy, you don't take care of yourself. It's a way of kind of like a constructive criticism, but it's definitely hurts people's feelings. And I think that's also the first part, like it's kind of normalized to fat shame people. And then the next thing that's normalized is accommodation culture. And that just means that a lot of places like Walmart will have like the rascals and the scooters for fat people. And I think that, and I'm not sure how they pay for that. Like, obviously, they make billions, but there could be, government, like, tax leniencies, or there could be like money from Social Security or other, or like maybe disabilities or whatever. I've not looked into that at all. I'm just guessing. But there could be companies that there could be like government policies that say, hey, you know what, you had to help disabled customers. So obviously, if you provide lots of people rascals and whatever, really, maybe that's how Walmart and other places make their money because they're like, hey, we're providing assistance to people with disabilities and other things like that instead of paying high taxes. There are companies that probably play those cards. We're going to provide mobility scooters and extra help for people, and you're going to cut our taxes. And then also too, it also talks about the other issue, which is it's not really about mobility scooters and helping people or fat shaming culture. It's all about the availability of unhealthy food like candy cane Oreos. Because there are countries where like there's certain sodas that are banned, and then there's also certain food that are banned, and also there are certain countries with sugar content and other thing like that. Like there's a certain limit to how much sugar you can have and stuff. But in America, we're very lenient on foods that can be banned. So that's all talked about in the first part, like how the availability of unhealthy food, fat shaming, and then also too that almost enableism because it's obviously there's a lot of money to be made on people that are unhealthy. So if you have stores that provide rascals or unhealthy food, it's like the unhealthy food in the store, in the hospital healthcare complex, because like that's just how how many money is made. People buy unhealthy food, they get big and fat, they get a lot of accommodations, they get more and more unhealthy. You put them in a hospital, and then hospitals make money, and healthcare makes money that way, and then money comes out of people's pockets, or there are some hospitals that will get people government assistance for their hospital bills. So it's all like a racket, really, to exploit people. So, people just have to know about that, and the cycle keeps on continuing. And definitely when you accommodate people for being unhealthy or say obesity is a disease or whatever, when more than likely it's just, a lot of people not taking responsibility for their health and also normalizing obesity, that's kind of where it comes from. And yes, there are some extreme cases where it is genetics, or people have slow metabolisms, or some people have eating issues, or eating unhealthy issues because it's a psychological thing more than just a thing about a lack of self control. And And then the next scene is that, Kyle Cartman talks to Kyle about an epiphany that he has. And Cartman's like, I'm fucking fat, really. And Kyle's like saying, hey, I just didn't mean it like that. So it kind of goes down to the fat shaming culture where people shame people for being fat. And sometimes people, like, follow what happens in Full Metal Jacket. Like, the best way to motivate a fat person is to hurt their feelings. And then Cartman responds to it by another way, which is like he gets a rascal, and then he says, and he says, oh well, insurance is gonna be like, if I gain a few extra pounds, then they're gonna pay for it. So ultimately, now Cartman, a character that likes being lazy, who doesn't like gym class, doesn't like sports or whatever, now he gave him a motivation to be unhealthy because things are going to work out for him if he maintains a very unhealthy lifestyle. So he gains a couple more pounds, and he now has a mobility scooter. And then also too, one thing that's talked about in earlier episodes is that his mother, Leanne Cartman, there's two things about her. She's very permissive. She gives in a lot. So obviously, there are parents that give in to kids who want to be big. And then also, we don't. There's not a lot of parents nowadays who want their kids to be healthy. So it's a statement of permissive parenting, and then also it's a statement of what also his mother does is that she gives him unhealthy food, and some people say that's because she wants to feel loved, and maybe it's a way of saying what she feels loved by giving him food or always being there for Cartman, really. So it's an intimate moment when she gives something of herself to others. Like, she gives herself sexually to others, and with her son, she gives him, you know, her ability to get him out of trouble whenever he gets in trouble, and her ability to provide for him, with food or whatever he wants, really. So yeah, it's just how he gets that mobility scooter because of a couple of factors. Because first of all, he knows he can exploit the insurance system. He knows that he'll be in an environment where he doesn't have to play sports or do school activities, and then also too, like, he can be more lazy by having a rascal instead of actually walking, really. So it's almost like how sometimes people will be unhealthy because they realize the positives outweigh the negatives. So that happens, and and Kyle's just kind of mad about that, really, and he's kind of like angry, and I think that comes from the fact that that's not what he meant, really. He meant Cartman should lose weight because Cartman is unhealthy, not, hey, Cartman, you should exploit the system. And then what happens is Cartman wants to take a crap in the Broflovski's house, and then he wants to take a crap at Best Buy. And I believe, he talks about, like, how, I like what he said, this is not how this country works, really. And it kind of goes back to what we're seeing nowadays of accommodation culture, where, you have to provide, like, multi-gender bathrooms, you have to, you know, um, provide a lot for people who are overweight and other things like that, really. So, and then what happens is that in some cases, you can sue, just like the woman a few months ago who was suing for taking a Lyft ride, and she was like too big for the car, and there could be a lawsuit against Lyft and all that. There's a lot of people who will sue the same way Cartman was trying to sue Best Buy over handicap or disability discrimination, even though a lot of people can say, what, the thing for Cartman to do is to lose weight and understand that being heavy is a form of shame, really. Like, go back to how it was generations ago, where being fat and sluggish was really frowned upon, and it motivated people to be healthy and other things like that. So we see a montage of like the benefits Cartman has. He's able to, get special booking at restaurants. He's able to cut some certain lines. He's able to not do gym class, because that's also another thing that happens too, is that sometimes when there are kids that are really heavy, or some kids can, like, get parental permission, get parents, like, write notes saying, hey, a kid can't play sports or whatever because either for whatever reason. And sometimes the reason could be, oh well, they're so big and obese, really, that they need their rascal, so you can't force them to use their legs. Or another thing that people can say is, oh well, somebody's so big they're going to get a heart attack if you force them to exercise. So that does happen as well, and that also happens a lot in schools, because usually with schools, a lot of times they give in to what parents want, really, instead of saying, hey, maybe we should take Cartman out of your care, Leanne, because he's so big that it's a form of child abuse. And And making people heavy, making children heavy is a form of child abuse, and you see that through Honey Boo Boo, and that's a huge point that I should talk about later in this episode review. So he goes through all that, and then what happens is he goes to Disney World, and um, he has to go in the back of line of Rascals, and that's kind of the joke, really, because Disneyland has a lot of people, and that's what you see in Disneyland. It's not just you, but hundreds of people behind Rascals, and then also he yells at a person who has like no legs, I believe. And the point of it is like how some people get so entitled, and they're like, hey, you know what? I like to exploit the system, but when other people are exploiting the system, or when somebody reasonably needs a handicap, you know, we kind of just are we get angry against those people, even though we should, even though we get angry at those people, even though we're exploiting it ourselves. Like it's a hypocrisy. So the episode goes on a little bit, and and then there's news reports talking about how the government wants to spend $25 million on mobility scooters, and then also spend more money because there's people doing rascal tipping. And I know that's supposed to be a joke, people rascal tipping, which means somebody's on a rascal, you push them over, and they start screaming and wailing like a pig. And this is about a couple of things that, to fight obesity and other issues that are avoidable. Yes, the government will put a lot of money in that, or people will say, okay, hey, stores, we're going to give you money for mobility scooters, because you remember like how government works. A lot of businessmen are in government, so they're just giving money to their own businesses or their friends' business. Taxpayer money to private scooters and all the other stuff. It's a racket, really. It's a racket of making people unhealthy. And then the other thing with the rascal tipping goes back to what I've said about fat shaming, or there could be a point in history where people, hurt fat people and whatever. Be like, hey, you know what? Well, fuck you. My taxes are going up because of your big fat ass. Or you know what? We're sick and tired of like making accommodations for fat people. Because it could turn into like assaults and whatever, because ultimately that's one of the reasons why hate crimes and other things happen, is because sometimes there may be a group of people that get better treatment than others, and other people are told to tolerate it, and that can easily happen with people who are obese. If you can cut the line, if you can board planes early, or if they say something like we overbooked a flight, people who are regular weight, one of them has to go instead of like an obese person. Or you ride a bus, or you ride a plane, really, and there are people who are fighting to say, if you weigh 400 or 500 pounds and you take up 3 seats, you have to. There are people who say you got to pay for one. There's people who say you got to pay for three, but the people who and then they may say, oh well, the other people have to like be pushed in with that really big fat person, when the person's taking up multiple seats, So it's kind of like, that type of culture where people are just like, there are people who are like, enough is enough, really. So the whole rascal tipping is a joke about comparing fat people to cows, tipping a cow, tipping a fat person over. And then also it's possibly a commentary on the fact that it can turn violent one day, because he would be like, well, I'm sick and tired of these, fat asses, to quote Scott Steiner, these fat asses, just raising our taxes and making life harder for everybody, or getting accommodations for their choices to be unhealthy. So then Cartman and Kyle kind of argue a little bit, and Cartman kind of says, okay, and Kyle calls Cartman a fat ass one more time, and Cartman gets really heated, and then they kind of talk about Honey Boo Boo. So it kind of is like also what we see nowadays, that there are people who kind of say like you can't say the word fat nowadays, like that's considered the F word. So it's also about like how people like take words, and now they're like, okay, now you got to go down to human resources, or now you got to be suspended from school for calling somebody fat. So it kind of goes into that culture of, yes, it's important to get rid of fat shaming and understand it's a form of bullying, but you're also getting to a point where you're allowing people to exploit the system to get what they want, really, and like Cartman does. And like he said, like, I'm not Honey Boo Boo, and then they talk about who Honey Boo Boo is, who participates in beauty pageants, and her mom is like her manager. And what happens is that like they joke about like how her mom cooks her unhealthy stuff, and she had like 3 heart attacks, and also like and also they kind of show like the controversy about her, which is that people like Honey Boo Boo because of her personality and her mom's personality, but also the other thing about Honey Boo Boo is that she does passions and she has some weight on her. So people like the fact that she's like she thinks she finds herself beautiful. She doesn't fit the image of a traditional beautiful child, like somebody thin, white, blonde hair, blue eyes, and that's important because beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but also beauty should not be, the blonde hair, blue eyed, skinny white girl, because that's been a huge image for a long, long time, really. So on one side, it's good that she's saying like all body sizes should be celebrated as beautiful. Like for example, I remember like seeing some news article. I remember watching some modeling magazines, and the front cover would have people who are albino. They did like Kylie Jenner, who changed. I believe did gender swap. There's some like there's some like magazines that have black women on it because for a long time, white women were considered more desirable. So like it's important to cause these changes and all that. Really, just to say anybody can be seen in a beautiful eye, and that's a good thing about Honey Boo Boo. But the other part of it is the shamelessness of the fact that she's very unhealthy and her mom cooks her like spaghetti with butter, and that's kind of like the issue too, is that like what I said about child abuse is that making kids allowing not being a good parent and allowing yourself to be unhealthy is a form of child abuse because you're surrounding yourself by you're surrounding a kid with an unhealthy diet. The same with Eric Cartman's mom. Like she gives some powdered donut pancake surprise, which I believe is like six donuts with powdered sugar and a heap of pancakes. So some people will say that's a form of child abuse, and you kind of look at Honey Boo Boo, and a lot of people will say that that's one of the bad things about her is that she encourages young girls to let themselves go and be fat and chubby and all that stuff, and instead of, but then there's the other side saying, hey, you know what, if you like your body size, you don't have to fit a certain narrative, so it's kind of like that that dichotomy of and the argument of on one side, is it okay to encourage people to be any size that they want to be because of personal choice? Is it okay to be like, okay, well, somebody doesn't care about their weight. Maybe one day they do and they feel insecure. Should they go to society standards? And then the other side is, should we just say it's all bad because we shouldn't be encouraging obesity on anybody? So it's those interesting arguments. You go a little bit more in the episode, and what happens is that Kyle wants to do a documentary on Cartman to expose his bullshit and how he's exploiting the system and getting benefits like being in the front of lines or getting like insurance to pay for his mobility scooter or not taking gym class and other things like that. He wants to do a documentary, and then Token tricks Kyle, and he does the documentary, and he kind of makes it a knockoff of Honey Boo Boo. And the reason why Token does that is because he's trying to represent corporate America. Like he represents exploiting a people, because he's trying to make another Honey Boo Boo for personal money. And Kyle says that he had that intention as well, really. And that's kind of why shows like Honey Boo Boo and other things exist, really, because it's not that they care about Honey Boo Boo, the executives and the corporations. They just want to they want to exploit her health because people are watching it, and it's drawing so much money, really. It's a cash grab. And then they don't care about the consequences, which is it can inspire people to think that behavior is okay to be unhealthy, or allow her to be a bad role model to encourage all people to be unhealthy. They want to make the money, really. And I also like what Token's argument is that the other thing is too that Token is black and his name is Token Black. So there are people in Hollywood who like Token's almost like a pimp in a way, like Iceberg Slim, where he says, okay, well, I can exploit Cartman and make money off of Cartman. And then there are plenty of black people, there's plenty of people of other races too, that will see somebody that they can exploit to make money off of them. And that does happen with how Token treats Eric Cartman, is that he's like, oh, well, I'm going to make this video and exploit Cartman. But unfortunately, what happens is that the video, Fatty Dude, who doesn't make money on TLC, and and he's gonna move on to the next thing. Like fuck it, it didn't work out. Fuck Hartman, I'm gonna move on. And that shows like how executives are. Like if Honey Boo Boo loses popularity and she doesn't, the show doesn't pick up or it's not in syndication, they don't care. They don't give a fuck about Honey Boo Boo or Mama June. If they're poor or whatever, or if Honey Boo Boo feels embarrassed later on in life and then she like has a drug addiction or a mental breakdown or destroys yourself. Do you think like the executives are gonna say, hey, you know what, we're gonna like give you $100,000. Your show made like tens of millions of dollars, but we're gonna give you like $100,000, a year just so you have something to live off of, so you're not like on the streets, or we're gonna pay for your college, or we're gonna pay for your rehab if you go through that, or we're gonna pay for therapy. No, it's just like once you're done really. So Kyle and Token also represent like how how people and especially television exploits people by exploiting like people who are on the shows, like like 600 Pound Life or Honey Boo Boo and other things like that. And then also um, Honey Boo Boo, I believe, is on the Learning Channel and talk about that, like the hypocrisy of the Learning Channel. When you think of that type of title, you would think of a show that's trying to encourage people to learn and be educated, but you're watching, like as Kyle said, a person trying to kill a person killing themselves by eating bad food, really, And I also like what Kyle says. Really, he's like, like imagine it was like a black girl, and I also think it's kind of funny too because like Honey Boo Boo is white, but obviously when the way it works in America is like American racism, people will be more sympathetic to a white girl having obesity and health issues, trying to do better, instead of if it was a black girl. And I also think that there's another thing too, really, because of Black Lives Matter and a lot of people standing up against black racism. Like if you did a show of a young black girl eating bad food and eating a lot of fried chicken or other like soul food dishes, some people may say, hey, that's racist because of the fried chicken, the watermelon stereotype. So it's interesting to see like how races are depicted. And then they go a little bit further in the episode, um, where they do like where Honey Boo Boo and Cartman do like spaghetti wrestling. They wrestle in spaghetti, and there's James Cameron, and there's like this invisible bar that that he raises, and when he does that, it makes society raise their standard. Then Michelle Obama fights obesity by beating up Cartman. It's a joke. It's a play on words. She fights obesity by beating up Cartman, and there's a couple things to unpack. That the whole thing about James Cameron is that he did like a few years ago he took a submarine to like a deep ocean depth, so they're making fun of that, and then also raising the bar, and that means two things. And I think like it's like people look up to people like James Cameron do all these feats and whatever really to make for their own egos, but I also think he's trying to say that what helps society get better is when we have our heroes or when we see people accomplish amazing things. Like you look at somebody like Mr. Beast, who does a lot of philanthropy, and he encourages philanthropy. So there's a lot of people watch his YouTube channel say, hey, I want to do a YouTube channel of something right. There's a guy named James Andrews who does travel videos and food reviews, where he's trying to like make the world a better place. There are people who do things like they'll make food dishes or do couponing and then teach other people how to save money or donate to charity. James Cameron kind of represents those people, against people like Nikado Avocado or Epic Mealtime or other people that promote unhealthy eating. I think the point of it is like how celebrities and how, the people who empower, who are celebrities, can inspire people to change their habits by being good role models, even if everything they do is for attention and to be ego driven. And then also too, like I think with Michelle Obama, I think that she's kind of a metaphor of like society as well, really, because there are some people, and there are like some like celebrities and politicians who are okay with people being unhealthy, or being part of shamelessness culture, or watching people make fools of themselves. But it's true that sometimes what happens is that it has to be a movement. Everybody has to be on the same page. That, if obesity and other things are cultural issues and societal issues, we all gotta just work hard to change. And it starts with politicians and celebrities just really really just standing together, really. Um, and that's important, you know. So I think overall it's a really great episode. But I also like the episode because I think like when Kyle and I think it was like Kyle and Stan or Kyle and Token at the end of the episode were talking about it, and they're really like sad about like how the world has kind of lost its standard and society's has become shameless, and we're in the muck of it all. I really felt sad during that because that's kind of really true. I think as you get older, you kind of see that society has become more indignant, like, or you kind of see like how like a lot of people have really dropped their standards, so or like we're talking about like or a lot of people talk about millennials or Generation Z and like how they're trashing movie theaters for the chicken jockey thing in Minecraft, or you see like people who post videos on Instagram of having 8 or 9 kids living in an apartment, and the apartment being trashy, or living in a hotel room and it being trashy, or you see some people online who like there was this rapper I think in the '90s who was making a lot of money with record deals, but he took his kids down to I think the food stamp or like the government assistant office and was like talking and bragging about how he's exploiting his check really. Um, so it's definitely true that when you look at society, I think as you get older and more wiser, really, I think in my 30s I started to do this. Is you look at society, it's like, man, it's really true that the younger generation struggles with like with being dignant or indignant. Well, it struggles with being indignant, but like I've always said, and being indignant has been around since the dawn of man. Really, I grew up in the '90s, where a lot of kids were profane. Well, there's a lot of latchkey kids, and there was a lot of kids who went from that culture of playing sports and hanging out a lot to just being home playing video games, or video games became the babysitter because parents were so busy working because of all that stuff. So every single generation does have its good side and bad sides, has its dignity and indignity. But it's definitely a powerful episode, and an episode that deserves a lot of dissection. It definitely deserves its Emmy. It talks about a lot of different it has a lot of different commentary in a very insightful and satire type of way, and it's also very disturbing because Honey Boo Boo gets a second gets a heart attack, gets a heart transplant, and she's like screaming around like a pig, really. And I think like it's meant to be dark comedy, but it's also kind of meant to be maybe a little bit of horror and just say like how disturbing it is because there are like kids who have to get surgeries and other type of things at young ages because their parents let them go, really, or like there's also talks of girls getting breast implants or people changing their genders or Botox, or people who are younger getting like suntans and other things like that, or people who are so obese at a young age they have to like maybe get like amputation because of diabetes, or they have to do other like surgeries or things like that. So it's also meant to be a little disturbing as well, but also insightful, and also just just a multi-layered commentary on fat shaming, people exploiting the system, people being exploited through media. Also, too, that celebrities and other people need to stand up to be good role models, even politicians. And I also think the other thing too is just understanding that people getting fat is it's an industry complex. It really starts with as like I said, people having easy access to unhealthy food, and not a lot of government regulation to take things like high fructose corn syrup and other bad stuff out of food, or ban food that's not healthy altogether, and then provide things like rascals and insurance and other assistance. And the long term game is that like people get sick and unhealthy, so that way they go to hospitals, and then the hospitals make money, and then the money that they make, the taxes go to the federal government, and then also too like with healthcare, a lot of people get paid very well in healthcare, and one of the reasons why why that happens is because all that money goes to state taxes and federal taxes. So ultimately, there is a system to profit off of people being obese, really. And maybe we need to go back to that culture where we shame people for being overweight, or we get into that culture where we force people to take gym class or other things like that. Like they showed footage of like what gym class was like in the '60s, and you had to like, and a lot of those people look very athletic, like look like they were in boot camp with the amount of physical activities. So sometimes, it's like, how do we approach this? Do we shame people who are fat? Do we give in to them? Are we like, okay, everybody has a lifestyle, and if your lifestyle is unhealthy, you die, whatever, really, or do we find a middle ground, or do we just advocate more? Or do we just teach people more about like mental health and shame and expect people to have higher standards? So it provides there's a lot of different talking points on something that's very simple, which is obesity should be a shameful thing unless you want to be obese, and also if it's a genetic thing where you have a slower metabolism than others, really. But importantly, it's your body, and you got to be in control of how you treat it. And importantly, when you have children, you got to be in control with their diets, really. And if when you're a celebrity and you are signed to projects, you have to think about your depiction and what your depiction does for society. Once again, one side, Honey Boo Boo is a person that says, what, fat is part of like fat pride culture, but on the other side, she's part of encouraging, you know, kids of all ages and even adults too, that being unhealthy and shameless is the way to go. Really, I've never watched a look of Honey Boo Boo, but that's kind of like what they're I'm depicting the episode of South Park. So it's a very cerebral one, and I'm happy that I started with this cerebral episode. Rightfully so, deserved its Emmy.